Hello and welcome to the My Genomic Health webinar. I'm Dr. Rebecca Rohrer and I'm the Incoming Director of Clinical Innovation and Genomics in Health Services at Bupa. And I'm going to share with you details of our exciting ongoing pilot called My Genomic Health. Next slide, please. Bupa is really proud to be the first major UK health provider to offer whole genome sequencing to our customers. We believe in a future where healthcare is truly preventative, allowing us to provide the latest clinical technology to keep our customers well. And our approach is personalised because we understand that everyone is unique. And by focusing on personalised prevention, we're able to proactively support our customers to live longer, healthier and happier lives. Next slide, please. Now, the My Genomic Health pilot offers really unique insights into individual health and well-being through whole genome sequencing, and I will be going into more detail about that later. But this innovative pilot has received widespread media coverage, including features in the Times and in the Telegraph, and that really highlights the shift towards personalised and preventative healthcare. After successfully offering this pilot to our employees, we're really excited to be able to extend this opportunity to you. Next slide, please. So, what is whole genome sequencing? And why are we so interested in it? Whole genome sequencing is a process that examines our entire genetic blueprint, the human genome. And the genome is a complete set of DNA, and it acts as an instruction manual that makes each of us unique. And while 99.8% of our DNA is identical to everybody else's, it's the 0.2% variation that really sets us apart. Now, whole genome sequencing looks at all of the 20,000 genes in our genome, and it provides insights into the health information that makes everybody unique. Now, genetic predispositions to various conditions often remain invisible until a diagnosis is made. But by testing for these predispositions, whole genome sequencing makes these hidden risks visible. And that empowers individuals to be able to manage their personalised risk profiles really proactively. Now, genetics is a major risk factor for common diseases, and sometimes it's the most important one. So factors like family history or ethnicity offer really incomplete information. But whole genome sequencing allows us to shift from reactive to proactive healthcare by focusing on prevention. Now, your genome sequence can reveal future health risks. Single genetic variants, things like the BRCA gene, which is linked to breast cancer, are really rare, affecting less than 5% of individuals, but they are significant. But more frequently, and for more common conditions, including things like cancers and heart disease, it's often not a single gene variant that increases your risk. Rather, it's lots of small genetic variants, which when they're all combined together, result in that higher risk. Now, whole genome sequencing gives us the opportunity to access all of this information together across multiple different condition areas. And it can also provide other really useful information related to your health. And this includes information about how you as an individual respond to certain medications. And we call that pharmacogenetics. And information is also provided around a wider variety of personal traits. And those can be, for example, related to how you as an individual respond to exercise or to different food groups. And lastly, information related to carrier genes. Now, these are genes that don't generally affect you as an individual, but they can affect your future offspring. By having all of this information together, you as an individual can have a really excellent insight into your own health and well-being, but also use this information to be able to optimize your health with the support of our clinicians. Next slide, please. Now, as this is a pilot, we have several goals to assess throughout the process, and that's really important. So firstly, as a pilot, we are going to be changing and adapting as we learn. So it's really important that we collect feedback and data from our participants in the pilot. And that's so that we can ensure that this really works and that it's actually optimizing the health and the well-being journey. Secondly, we want to help to understand the participant needs after whole genome sequencing testing, and that's so that we can ensure that all of our onward pathways are as efficient as possible for all of our customers, and also that the journey is really excellent. Now, thirdly, we want to be able to understand what difference we can make to the lives of our customers if we're able to interject in this early way, ahead of any ill health occurring. For example, if you're aware that you have a risk of developing a certain condition and can take preventative action to stop that condition from developing, then what does that do to you in terms of impacting your health and well-being in a positive way? And fourthly, we really want to be able to understand how we can develop and to use this test and technology in our future proposition in a way that really adds value to our customers in the future. Next slide, please. So, whole genome sequencing allows us to test for genetic predispositions to lots of different conditions. But this pilot is focusing on actionable conditions. And those are the ones that you can actively reduce the risk of developing or detect earlier. This approach really emphasizes prevention, and it does so by providing the most useful information to individuals. It's important to note that predictive genetic testing, including whole genome sequencing, doesn't definitively predict whether a condition will occur. What it does is it identifies higher risk predispositions that might otherwise remain invisible. And this helps you manage and contextualize those risks to your individual circumstances. Now, the key to bringing this all together by understanding your personalized risks of developing actionable conditions is that while you can't change your genetic makeup, you can take proactive steps to prevent ill health. Now, that might include frequent screening, lifestyle changes, self-examination, and being aware of symptoms to allow early detection. And we know that that leads to better overall outcomes. Late diagnosis is a really big challenge in medicine, and it's often due to an unawareness of symptoms that can result ultimately in poorer outcomes. And we want to change that with this pilot. Although genetic risk is crucial, it's not the only factor in developing conditions. And this pilot adds data points to our existing knowledge of risk factors, helping our customers with a comprehensive amount of information so that they can be aware of those risks. We know that certain factors like age, family history, and genomic sequence can't be changed. But factors like sleep, screening patterns, diet, exercise, and habits like smoking and alcohol can be modified. And we know it's not an information gap in terms of the things that people need to be doing to improve their health and well-being. But while it's not an information gap, we do know that it's really, really difficult to make these changes. And by empowering individuals with that personalized information, we are able to shift towards that preventative and proactive healthcare model. Next slide, please. Now, the My Genomic Health pilot tests for genetic predispositions to various conditions, all of which are actionable. There's a full list of the conditions available in the brochure, which is on the website. Some conditions might be unfamiliar because they're really rare, while others may be really well known to you. Now, based on test results, a personalised health plan is created for each individual going through the pilot, and that identifies particular risks. And I wanted to give you two examples just to bring that alive today. The first is Lynch syndrome. Now, that affects about 1 in 400 individuals, but only about 5% of those individuals are aware that they have it. And unfortunately, it significantly increases the risk of bowel cancer. So a lifetime risk can be as high as 80%. Regular surveillance and frequent bowel cancer screenings, such as colonoscopies, are recommended because of this. And early detection through this information can lead to better outcomes. Now, this is a really excellent example of how being empowered with this information can help you take those proactive steps to help you improve your chances of early detection if that condition were to occur in the future. Now, the second example that I want to talk about is familial hypercholesterolemia. And that affects about 1 in 250 individuals, and that impacts their ability to reduce LDL or bad cholesterol. Less than 8% of people know that they have it, but the condition leads to really high levels of cholesterol levels from birth and has about a 50% chance of a heart attack by the age of 50. However, the positive news is that if we detect it early, the treatment needed to reduce your risk is very simple and cheap, such as taking a medication to lower cholesterols like a statin. Therefore, having access to this information empowers individuals to take proactive steps to improve their health and well-being. Next slide, please. There are a few things that it's really important to consider before joining the pilot. So firstly, discovering that you might be at increased risk of a certain condition can be really challenging for some people. It's very important to be able to prioritize your mental health and well-being. So if you think that this might make you more anxious, it's really important to take this into consideration before embarking on the test. Secondly, everybody has different levels of risk appetite. This test is designed to help you understand your risk profile, not to predict with certainty that you're going to develop any condition. Some people might find that informative, and that they might find that information very motivating, and they allow them to want to make changes to their lives. But other people might find the uncertainty in discovering the fact that they're at risk of developing a certain condition quite anxiety provoking. So it's really important to know yourself and how you're going to react to that kind of information before deciding that you want to take the test. By considering how you might react, you can better prepare yourself and to take positive actions towards your health and well-being. And remember, there's support provided as part of the pilot along the way. Finally, the impact of this on your family. Understanding your genetic risk can provide really valuable insights for your family members. Knowing your predispositions helps your children and your siblings be aware of any potential risks they may share, but it's definitely something to bear in mind. Now, taken together, the really important thing is that you're making an informed decision to take part in this pilot, and we are here to support you in doing that. Next slide, please. So next, I really wanted to talk to you a bit more about how the pilot and the project could work for you. Next slide, please. So there are 4 key parts to the pilot, and I'm going to talk you through them one by one. The first step is around choice. Now, you have a choice to speak to a genetic counsellor before providing your consent to participate in the pilot. The counsellor's role is to talk to you about your family history and also answer any questions you might have before making the decision to proceed. Whilst this is optional, we do really strongly recommend counselling, and particularly for 4 particular groups. Firstly, if you're an identical twin. Now, the reason for this is that it's important to obtain consent from both twins, because essentially sequencing one identical twin is essentially sequencing the other. So it's really important that both individuals are informed and can make the decision to proceed together. The second is pregnancy. Now, we know that pregnancy can be a very stressful time, and so receiving a genetic risk or some information about that might be quite difficult at that stage. So for that reason, we'd really recommend that you consider the timing and how it might impact your well-being, which is something that you can discuss in full with a genetic counsellor. Another reason is if there's a strong family history of a specific genetic condition, for example, bowel cancer, then whole genome sequencing may not be the most appropriate genetic test for you. And in those cases, there might be other very specific genetic panels that might be able to provide more relevant information for you. And again, the counsellor is going to be able to discuss all of those options with you. Now, the final area as we touched on before, is health anxiety. And if you feel that you have health anxiety, or you think you might experience health anxiety by going through the pilot, then it's really advisable to speak to a genetic counsellor in advance. And that's so you can talk about it, you can understand how and if you wish to proceed. Moving on, for those individuals who don't feel like any of that applies to them, you are then able to go straight through to the second stage, which is the blood sample process. And that's where blood is extracted via a simple blood draw, and the blood is then analysed and sent off for reporting. You're then able to proceed to step 3, which is that an expert is going to review your report and share the findings with you. You're going to be offered appointments to discuss the results. And for a small number of individuals, there may be a need to refer on for a forward pathway, but we're going to support you so that you're really clear about what your options are and what you need to do next, so that we can help guide you through those next steps. It's also worth remembering that as a Bupa customer, you have access to all of your PMI benefits, as well as the standard screening services that are available to you. And that includes things like mental health and our wellbeing offerings as well. Next slide, please. So, who can take part in the pilot? Well, participation in the pilot is free. There are some criteria that we need to adhere to, and to be eligible, you must be the main policyholder within your private medical insurance scheme. You need to be over 18 years of age, and you need to be living in the UK, and you need to be able to travel to London for follow-up care if required. We also ask you to agree to the terms and conditions of the My Genomic Health pilot, including providing feedback, which I've mentioned is so important here. And finally, we ask you to provide consent for clinical and for data participation. Next slide, please. So, what will Bupa fund as part of the pilot? We've talked about those early stages around the counselling and around the analysis of blood and the results presented in the form of a personalised report. All of that is included. Now, based on the results of the report, you may also be eligible for follow-up appointments with our doctors to discuss the results and the next steps for improving health outcomes. And at our discretion, additional screenings or medical interventions may be provided if they're deemed to be suitable and necessary. It's really important to remember that the My Genomic Health aims to prevent disease, not diagnose conditions that you're already experiencing symptoms of. So if our doctors identify symptoms of a condition like cardiovascular disease, then this won't be funded by the pilot. And the reason for this is because you would be symptomatic. So instead, you're going to be referred to a Bupa recognised specialist, and you're able to use your Bupa health insurance policy as per our standard rules and eligibility. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we're going to ask for your feedback throughout the 2-year pilot, and that's to help us understand how your whole genome sequencing has benefited you. Your feedback is so vital in helping us track the impact of the results on your lifestyle changes and on the outcomes, and we really appreciate your commitment to this. As a member of the Association of British Insurers, Bupa is signed up to the Code on Genetic Testing and Insurance, and we call this the Code. And what this means is that Bupa does not recognise, require you or pressure you to have a predictive or a genetic test. It also means that we won't ask for or take into account any of the results of the test that you receive throughout this process. However, it's worth bearing in mind that if you apply for life insurance over £500,000 and you've had a predictive test for something called Huntington's disease, other insurers might look at this test result as part of your application for their insurance. Bupa doesn't report on the Huntington's gene as part of the My Genomic Health, so it's really important bearing that in mind. Now, the Code of Genetic Testing and Insurance only applies to ABPI members, so it's really important to understand that if you're planning to live outside the UK, or if you're planning to take out an insurance policy with a with an insurer that isn't subscribed to the code of practice, then you may be asked to share those genetic results at that point. Finally, also worth you being aware that we hold the clinical data for 20 years. Next slide, please. So, in terms of more information, our new My Genomic Health webpage has all of the information that you will need going forward. It particularly contains a great brochure which you can download to learn about whole genome sequencing, how it works, and the conditions that we test for. It's also got an FAQ document which is based on our learnings and answers some of those really common questions. There's also a video by our Chief Medical Officer at Cromwell, Dr. Sarah Frampton, and that explains very succinctly what to expect and what to consider before you participate. Also contains all of the details around our terms and conditions and our privacy notice, which I'd recommend that you read through. Now, in terms of expressing your interest, there's a link on the webpage for you to be able to express an interest, and there are just a few short details that you need to put into the system to register that this is something that you'd like to be considered for. If we are oversubscribed in the pilot, then what we do is select participants at random and will inform you when a space becomes available. Finally, I hope that you found this session really informative and interesting. This is such a fascinating space. It's such a delight to talk about it. A recording of the webinar is going to be uploaded onto the webpage and it's going to be distributed after this. And for any other questions, please email us at mygenomichealth@bupa.com. We really look forward to your interest. Thank you. And I think we now have some time for questions. Perfect. So the first question I've received is, do I have to declare my findings on future insurance policies? Now, we covered this briefly during the webinar. As I mentioned, we are signed up to the Code on Genetic Testing and Insurance, which is a voluntary code of practice between both the government and the Association of British Insurers, the ABPI, which I mentioned earlier. And this means that Bupa Insurance is committed to the following. So, as I mentioned, we don't require or pressure you to have a predictive or genetic test under any circumstances. And secondly, you need to be aware of that if you already live or if you plan to live outside the UK, then the code won't apply. And you might be asked to disclose details of any genetic tests that you've had done before. And secondly, if you apply for that life insurance over the £500,000 mark and you've had a predictive genetic test for Huntington's disease in particular, then you'll need to tell the insurer the result of that, but only if they ask. So one of the questions was, what happens if a health scheme lapses or if I leave during the pilot? And the pilot is designed so that if you lapse after the blood is taken, then those results will still be processed, you'll still be sent a report, and you'll also still have the option of then discussing those results. After that point, any follow-up care or consultation would be either with your new provider or with the NHS if necessary. Now, the second question that we had is, how will Bupa use the personal data collected in the pilot? That's a great question. We're very cognizant of all of the privacy concerns around data. So we use the data to conduct testing, to discuss the pilot with the counselling services with you, and also to be able to provide onward health plans. And that allows us to comply with our legal and our regulatory obligations. But it also allows us to assess the pilot's effectiveness through analytics. For more details on that, then the privacy notice is on the webpage, as I mentioned. Another question is, how will you protect my personal data? Again, we take privacy so seriously as part of this pilot, and we've put in place lots of technical and organisational measures to allow us to safeguard your personal data and to prevent any unauthorised access and disclosure. We have lots of ways to keep your personal data safe. So firstly, controlled access. So only certain people are able to see the data, and that's following Bupa's rules. We have very secure transport so that when data is moved, it's sent through an encrypted link. We have rules around secure processing in terms of when people at Bupa are allowed to use the data. They have to do it from secure laptops with lots of extra protections in place. Authentication is really important. So when somebody wants to see their own data, then they have to prove who they are in order to be granted access to it. And these are some of the ways in which we make sure that your personal data stays really safe and secure. A very good question around, will my personal data be shared with third parties? We do share personal data with third parties, but only to undertake the test and to be able to provide you with the results. So we're very stringent about how we do that. Now, those third parties can include both the consultant, clinical geneticist, and genetic counsellors. It also includes our Spanish business, who assist in the genetic testing, and also a company called Veritas, who specialise in genomic medicine that help to conduct the genomic testing at its lab facilities, and certain other third parties where required. Now, we ensure that protections are in place that adequately safeguard your personal data when sharing it with third parties, and really require those parties to agree to adequately protect your personal data. And that's all in accordance with our data protection law requirements. I have a Bupa Global International Private Medical Insurance policy, but I don't live in the UK. Can I access My Genomic Health overseas? Unfortunately not. So the pilot is currently only available to you in the UK, and that's because of some of the restrictions that I mentioned earlier. So members will be informed when it becomes available in other overseas locations, but for now you need to be a UK resident, unfortunately, and partly to be able to attend some of those face-to-face appointments in the UK. But great question. I'm adopted, but I don't have any health information of my parents. Is that an issue? Not at all, is the answer to that. So sometimes if you don't have an understanding of your family history, actually whole genome sequencing could be really beneficial. And that is because it allows you to learn what you're more genetically at risk of developing. But again, that's something that the genetic counsellor will be able to counsel you about and to be able to talk in depth to. Where can I attend for blood samples to be taken, or is this completed by us at home? So we've got a select number of Bupa clinics, and they're going to be able to take your blood tests. As I mentioned, that's a simple venous blood draw. At present, we have clinics in London, Cambridge, Milton Keynes, Cardiff, Leeds, Manchester, Belfast, and Edinburgh. But again, if you have any questions, then please do email us. Another great question, what are the timelines for the process from registration through to results taking place? From us taking the blood sample, the process takes about 10 to 12 weeks. But as I mentioned, we're here to support you during that process. Good clinical question here, which is, would the test show any indications of Alzheimer's disease? So no, so that's not one of the condition areas that we test for. We only report back on conditions that are actionable for you to help address, to reduce the risk of developing it. And so for that reason, Alzheimer's, because we can't report back on those actionable findings, hasn't been included in this instance. My husband has a condition and has a heart condition and is on 7 tablets a day. If he was to have genome sequencing, would that help with the medication that was prescribed? So potentially, I can't comment on individual clinical cases, but so far, almost 100% of the people who have gone through the pilot have had some sort of, have had a meaningful pharmacogenetics result that has shown some sort of actionable change into how they respond to common medications. I'm just going to see if there are any other questions. Can I do this if I'm pregnant? So the question is, can I do this if I'm pregnant? We did answer that briefly before. Yes, you can, but we do recommend that you go through that genetic counselling process, just because it can be really stressful time. And obviously it's not just your genetics. At that point, it's the fetuses as well. And so, actually understanding the risk of potentially developing a genetic condition might be really stressful. So worth discussing that with the genetic counsellor. Does it give me any insight into my fertility? So that is not one of the actionable conditions at the moment. But again, I think if you have specific concerns, maybe about conditions that might be running in the family, I would also really recommend that you speak to a genetic counsellor, because they might be able to either suggest alternative, better suited tests, or be able to talk through the pros and cons of whole genome sequencing. My commercial DNA test results show that I'm a carrier of multiple risk alleles of a rare disease that can be passed to my kids. How will this program help? So again, I can't speak to individual circumstances. I think if there is a strong family history that has been investigated in more detail with a specific genetic test, my advice would be to speak to our genetic counsellors to understand how that might be added to by whole genome sequencing, and also how the risk might be interpreted in the context of whole genome sequencing, or if other specific tests might be more suitable. Can you explain a bit more about the traits element of the testing? So when we say traits, it really means a risk of developing certain conditions. So it doesn't mean, unlike a BRCA gene, for example, which we know infers significant risk of developing certain conditions if that gene is switched on or off. Traits is a much more kind of polygenic pattern. So it means that actually it's small changes across multiple genes that show that you may be at increased risk of developing certain conditions. Again, it's worth having a look through our brochure to explain that in more detail, or if you have any specific traits that you're interested in, also worth emailing us and we can delve into more detail. Could the test discover that a disease is already present, a cancer, or just a predisposition? So as I mentioned, this test and this pilot is really focused on asymptomatic risk. So this is risk that isn't already presenting with symptoms. So if a condition is found that is already presenting with symptoms and is already present, then it won't be shown up by this test. But there are ways for you to be able to take further action. We're here to support you through that, through your regular private medical insurance. If a problem is found, what kind of treatment do you provide? Again, that depends on what the problem is. So we will provide this personalised report. For specific areas, we do provide follow-up appointments. And that really depends on what kind of medical conditions are found and what the risk levels are as well. What information would be shared with my GP? So that is up to you. So within our privacy concerns, the report is provided to you. You don't need to disclose any information above and beyond that I mentioned in the webinar. I have to say, as a practicing GP, I think this information is incredibly valuable to have. And so I would recommend that you speak to your GP about it. But of course, that is entirely up to you. This is personal medical information and is private to you. I'm a regular blood donor, notwithstanding results of the sequencing. Does this process have any impact on donating blood? I would probably recommend that you speak to the blood donation guys, because they have specific requirements on recent blood tests, etc. But in general, Standard venous draws of blood don't have any impact on donating blood, but I know that they do sometimes have some specific requirements. And well done for donating blood, because that's really important. Can the result come back identify no risk at all, or will there always be some risk? Yeah, absolutely. So the majority of people, as I mentioned, about 100% of the pharmacogenetics results do come back showing that your response to medication is affected by your genetics. But actually, many people do end up having results that don't show that there are any ongoing risks. However, I do always recommend that, once you receive your report, if you have any questions, then we're here to answer questions on that. And we're always here to have that follow-up appointment so that you can discuss the report in detail. What we don't want is that you leave the pilot having any unanswered questions, because the function of the pilot is that we understand the role of whole genome sequencing and what impact it's had on you. Do we get a personalised action plan as a result to mitigate the highlighted risks? Absolutely. So that is a key output of the pilot, is that the report that we give is personalised to you, to your level of risk, and then those follow-up appointments are really to be able to delve into that and to be able to come up with a kind of personalised plan that you're able to enact to act specifically on those risks. If the report indicates a genetic condition relevant to children under 18 years old on my policy, will they be eligible for treatment or prevention? Unfortunately not. So as I mentioned, so under 18s, and that's because they can't legally consent to genetic testing. And that is the same across the sector. So once a participant is over 18 and they're covered as a dependent of the PMI, then absolutely they would be eligible. But for under 18s, because they legally can't consent to the screening and to be able to understand the impact of it, they are unfortunately excluded. We're just seeing if there are any more questions. These are great questions, by the way. Is there a fee cost of taking part in the pilot? Absolutely not. The pilot and everything that I mentioned earlier in the webinar is free to take part. What is the time commitment to the pilot over the 2-year period? So I think what I would recommend is spending some time on the web page, making sure that you're comfortable with all of the information before registering your interest. You can give us an email if you have any other outstanding questions. Once you've registered your interest, then the time commitment is really in that genetic counselling time. So, that can be remote or face-to-face. And that, is half an hour of your time. Obviously, going to the clinic for the blood test itself. The clinics are in those locations that I mentioned, so factor in some travel time for that. And then obviously the time to receive your results and to have any follow-up appointments. So the time commitment is as minimal as we have been able to design. We understand that you're very busy people, but we also want to make sure that it's an informed choice about you taking part in this pilot, and that we've made it as easy as possible for you. If there is cancer in your family history, does that mean that you can't take part? So it's not an exclusion. So if there is a family history of cancer, but it could also be, cardiovascular disease, heart attacks in younger members of your family, that is not an exclusion to taking part. What I would recommend, however, is that you take up that option of going to see the genetic counsellor, because it's going to be really valuable for you and for them to be able to sit down, to be able to deep dive into what that family history looks like, and into what impact that might have on results of the test, but also how you feel about that, what your risk appetite is, what impact that might have on you and your wider family. Can I withdraw at any stage? Great question. Yes, you can, absolutely. So you can send us an email, and you can absolutely withdraw at any stage. That's perfectly within your rights. I think we don't have any more questions. I hope that that's been answered fully. Apologies for the technical hiccup in the middle, but from my end, that's really helpful discussion, really good questions, and we don't have any more questions. So thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.